Welcome to our kitchen. Today we prepare a medieval chicken soup, yellow colored and fragrant with spices and aromatic herbs. We start with the ingredients. We need 1 chicken, cured pork fatback, eggs, onions and the spices, saffron, black pepper, cloves, cinnamon and ginger. And then the fresh herbs, rosemary and marjoram. First, we mince the cured pork fatback. In the antiquity, cured pork fatback, called lardum in Latin, was mainly a condiment for common people. But during the Middle Ages, it became the favorite cooking fat in high-end cuisine. This change in the alimentary habits is recorded by the 6th century Byzantine physician Antimus, who worked in Italy and France for the Ostrogoth and the Frank kings. He reports that Franks ate a lot of cured pork fat, and makes the curious statement that raw cured pork fat, which he considers usually unhealthy, for them was very beneficial and was like a medicine. We slice 1 onion. We find white round onions in the illuminated manuscripts of the medical handbook Tarquinum Sanitatis. Both white and red onions are described, for example, in the 15th century by the physician Michele Savonarola. Then we cut the chicken into pieces. Chicken is the most used meat in the medieval cookbooks. It's also considered one of the healthiest meat by medieval physicians. Now we melt the cured pork fatback. Mincing the pork fatback, we leave small fried pieces in the soup that will contribute to the flavor and texture of the dish. If you prefer to melt it completely, we suggest to pound it in the mortar after mincing it. We add the onion. We cook it for a couple of minutes until it wilts. Then we add the chicken. There are several chicken and capon soup recipes in the medieval cookbooks. Roasted and boiled chicken are very common too. We find as well recipes for chicken pies, as the one we prepared a few months ago. You will find the link to the video in the description below. We sear the chicken for a few minutes, then add the water and let the chicken cook. The cooking time changes depending on the size of the pieces and the breed of the chicken. However, it's important not to cook the chicken just until it's done, but to cook it until the meat is very tender and almost fall off the bone. For our chicken, it took about 1 hour. We didn't add salt, because the cured pork fatback we used is quite salty. But we suggest tasting the broth to decide whether or not to add salt. Meanwhile, we grind in the mortar black pepper, cloves and cinnamon. This recipe is part of an anonymous Tuscan manuscript, written in the 14th century. Anonimo Toscano is a translation in vernacular of a 13th century cookbook, titled Liber de Cucina, with several additions and variations. The recipe we're using today is a different version with more ingredients of the one in the Liber de Cucina, in which the only spice is saffron. Then we add the saffron. The 13th century physician Aldobrandino da Siena reports that saffron added in chicken soups is healthy for the stomach. Saffron was one of the most used spices during the late Middle Ages. It was widely cultivated in Italy, but it was also imported to meet the high demand. It was known both with the Latin name crocus and the name of Arabic origin zaffarano, likely to mark the difference between the local and imported varieties. Then we mince the ginger. Ginger was imported from India since the antiquity and is a very common spice in medieval cookbooks. It was used both fresh and dry. We suggest to use it fresh for a better outcome of the recipe. We mince the herbs. The author doesn't specify which fresh herbs to use. We chose from our aromatic garden 2 of the fresh herbs he uses in other recipes. You can substitute them with other aromatic herbs, fresh or dry. For example, in other recipes of this cookbook, we find parsley, dill, mint, and sage. We add the minced ginger and the fresh herbs. Pounding the fresh herbs and ginger, we release all their flavor, obtaining a broth with an intense and well-blended aroma. Then we dilute the mixture with a bit of the broth of the chicken. The author in some recipes grinds the saffron, in others he soaks it in water. This time he uses both methods. First he grinds, then dilutes it with a bit of broth. When the chicken is almost cooked through, we add the spices. Medieval cooks pay close attention to the color of the dishes, and yellow was one of their favorite colors. In this recipe, it's important to balance the ratio of saffron and herbs, not to overshadow the yellow of the saffron with too much green. The name of this dish is brodo granato, that can be translated as grainy broth. We will achieve this texture with the final step, adding the egg and stirring until it forms small uniform grains. We beat 1 egg, adding cold water and broth. The medical advice of Aldobrandino is to eat eggs in a soup with meat. He also suggests the healthiest spices for eggs: pepper, cinnamon, and ginger. The advice of the medieval physicians often shows the close connection between the medieval medical theories and cuisine. We add the beaten egg and stir. Pay attention not to overcook the egg for a better texture and flavor. The 11th century medical treatise, De Flore Dietarum, gives us the same advice, stating that eggs are healthier if not cooked too much. This flavorful chicken soup is a delicious way to taste how one of the most common meats was served in a medieval banquet. If you're interested in ancient foods and flavors, or you're just looking for unusual and delicious recipes, please subscribe our channel.